The Rockets have announced that James Harden has arrived in Houston and tested in accordance with the NBA's COVID protocol. That test happened today. Harden, as you may remember, was all over Instagram the past few days when he attended rapper Lil Baby's birthday party in Atlanta without wearing a face mask. Reports of him in Vegas. Adrian Wojnarowski and Tim MacMahon report that Harden told the Rockets before the beginning of training camp he'd be open to a trade to the 76ers. Remember, he wanted to go to the Nets initially, according to early reports, but there has not seemed to be traction there. Harden also said he would be interested in joining another, quote, contending team. Remember, Harden turned down an extension a couple weeks back worth more than $50 million per year attached to it. So that might send a message. New Rockets coach, head coach Stephen Silas spoke about the developments just a couple moments ago. Take a listen.
I am aware that he was getting his test today here in Houston. And so that leads to the fact that he is here. And that's pretty much all I know right now. It's kind of there's some moving parts to it, I assume, but him getting tested in Houston is good for everybody. You know, trust is built day to day, and once the relationship begins, then we'll begin that process of trust. The good thing that I have here, and one of the reasons that I was so excited to get this job, is like we're not in a rebuilding situation. You know, ownership and Rafael have done a great job of putting a really good team together, adding John Wall, adding Cousins, adding Wood, and now adding James to that is still very exciting.
Stephen Silas, by the way, for a rookie head coach, very impressive throughout these whole last few days. And I want to welcome in our ESPN NBA reporter down in Texas, Tim MacMahon, who's been right on top of this story. Judging from what you heard from Silas and company today, when do the Rockets expect to see James Harden at practice?
Well, that depends on when he clears the NBA's COVID protocols, and Stephen Silas isn't quite sure. But obviously the good news for the Rockets is James Harden is in Houston. He did report to the Toyota Center, so the process has begun to getting him cleared to be able to practice with the team. And, you know, the Rockets all along anticipated that this would happen at some point. Of course, they thought he'd be there for the start of camp, and they thought he'd be there yesterday.
Imagine that.
A couple days late, little Vegas vacation. Hey, little Vegas vacation. In some ways, it's, quote, James being James, but obviously, with the situation of him having requested to be traded, it is different than some of his previous Vegas vacations, his annual post-All-Star stop in Vegas and miss a practice situations.
And I always like to point out for the people watching that, quote, holdouts, they don't work in the NBA. They don't work the way they would in the NFL. An NFL player can hold out and the clock on his contract continues. He's just not getting paid. In the NBA, the clock on your contract doesn't start until you report. So holding out doesn't do anything for a guy because it just pushes his attachment to the team that he might be holding out from for even longer. He can ask for a trade, though, and you reported the addition, Tim, of the Sixers to Harden's list of trade targets. What is the Rockets' reaction to this, especially since the man that they would be dealing with to make this trade would be Daryl Morey, who told them that he wanted to take a year or so off from basketball. They let him out of his contract, and a week later it turned out that he wanted to take what you have called it a gap week instead of a gap year, and showed up in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and look, is it maybe awkward if they get into serious discussions? Sure. To be clear, to this point, there have not been any real significant discussions between the Rockets and Sixers. And what Harden has said is, look, Brooklyn is still his preference. He would certainly be open to the Sixers or other contending situations, but there's just a short list of teams that fit both his criteria of a contender, and that can also give the Rockets the, you know, franchise cornerstone and bundle of either young talent or draft picks in return. And obviously that's where you get to the 76ers as a partner that could make sense. Important to note, however, Daryl Morey has been absolutely adamant that he is not interested in breaking up that duo of Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. And obviously, if you're talking about a young franchise cornerstone, if one of those guys aren't coming back to Houston, there's no discussions to be had.
Yeah, and look, Tim, we talked about the fact that you can't really hold out, right, in the NBA. And I loved your reporting at the beginning of all of this when the reports were out that Harden wanted to trade, and then you talked to the Rockets, and they said that they were willing to get uncomfortable. What kind of message do you think James Harden has been trying to send these past few days about how uncomfortable this might actually get in terms of what they ask for or wish for? Oh, we've lost him. I don't know. I can ask our guys about what message James Harden has been trying to send. I'll bring back in Richard Jefferson and Kendrick Perkins here. Guys, as I said to Tim and started to talk about, he said, hey, we're willing. The Rockets said, hey, we're willing to get uncomfortable. Well, there was a reporting date for the Rockets, and James Harden was first in Atlanta with Lil Baby, and then he was reportedly in Las Vegas. What message do you think that he's been trying to send?
I think that James Harden is okay with being uncomfortable also. I think that's the message. He's like, yo, that's fine. You guys can be uncomfortable. I'm okay with making this uncomfortable. Now, this is the thing. Is there a level of professionalism that you want all players to have? Yes, but I think James, if he's behaving like this, then you have to believe that he has communicated to them that he does not really want to show up to camp, that he would prefer to be traded before camp starts. And so if they didn't take that in and they're saying, listen, you're under contract, you have to show up, then he's like, okay, well, I'm going to show up on my own time. And this can continue to get uglier on both sides, not just on his side. So hopefully they can come up with some sort of agreement.
Well, it's interesting, RJ, that you brought up that James Harden and the Rockets have communication. It's a lack of communication that was going on. And it started from the top of the hiring of the GM and the hiring of Steve Silas. From my understanding, it didn't get the approval from James Harden. But with that being said, you still have to show up to work. And I think James is at fault, not for requesting a trade or wanting a different scenery, but for him not showing up to work.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.